eventually they started playing around the area, and they said, well, come on, do the sound for us. And so I started helping them out, just doing sound and swapping some equipment for them. And eventually, the bigger they got, the more people I hired, and I didn't have to schlep. And then we hired a sound man, and so I kind of moved up, up the chain, the food chain.
One of the things that made us good was that we were genuine. It wasn't so much an act as these basically outcast guys who were getting a chance to have their dreams come true and play rock and roll on stage. I thought Johnny Ramone was a brilliant guitarist for what he was doing. I mean, he came up with an original, unique style of guitar playing. He knew what he was good at and perfected it to the ultimate degree. So as far as punk rock guitar is concerned, he was the best.
John was a great guy. He was very down to earth. He had politics that were right wing of Attila the Hun, really. He was the most unpunk person you could ever meet.
I think he was a genius. A genius, to me, by definition, is somebody who invents his profession. I think somebody that does something the way that nobody else has done it before. And that is very, very different from being a technically accomplished musician. I had this discussion with John a couple of times. I told him that I felt the Ramones were way better artists than musicians. To him, that was too artsy-fartsy an statement, To him, thinking of being an artist was meaningless, inconsequential, he didn't care to think about it at all.
Well, for what he's developed in his style, yes. I mean, he developed that just basic punk rock raw guitar of no downstrumming. Nobody was doing it at the time. Most people play like this. He was just going down, 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 down. He developed the whole thing just to fit the Ramones style.
It's difficult. The downstrumming technique is difficult to reproduce for most guitar players because they play both up and down, and it's easier to play up and down than just down. Johnny liked to play down because he got a good tone out of his guitar. He really loved Led Zeppelin's Communication Breakdown. That riff, the original opening riff of it, which is played with downstrokes. So he found out that that's how that's played, and he said, well, that sounds great, so he decided to play that. Now, it's very hard, especially at the speed that the Ramones played, to play like that.
It became important because that's the way John did it. The Ramones created a style, like a lot of artists do. While at the beginning they were trying to do something else. I think that some artists are trying to do things applying knowledge or theory or experience, and sometimes that's not enough. And what really works is when they finally create music, the music that they can't help but they have to create because it's what they have inside.
first of all, I thought that he was very original looking, and that combined with the fact that he had a very kind of a colorful, mellifluous, you know, it was pleasant sounding voice, you know, and nice, deep, rich, and he was just so unique looking. I remember the first time I ever met him, when he was a young kid, you know, and he was just so striking looking and so different. And I thought this would be an interesting looking front man, because he was so different from the usual lead singer front person. And so I thought it would be a nice colorful touch to a colorful band.
I mean, there was nobody like him. He was completely unique. I mean, just looking at him, he was a unique character, sure. Of course it developed. I mean, we're talking about, 20 years. In the beginning, I don't know if you ever saw any of the early footage of them. It was it was kind of ridiculous, I mean, they had to develop. They had to develop their personalities on stage. It took a while, a couple of years.
First of all, the Ramones loved pop music, like I said, but Joey especially had an innate ability and love to create incredible pop songs. He just, it's interesting how he started writing songs. He was given a guitar that only had 2 strings on it, and he realized that if he tuned the strings in fifths, that by pressing just on them, he could come up, just basically play like a 1-string instrument, and immediately started writing songs. And he was coming up, I think the first song he wrote was I Don't Care, which was a basic rewriting of the Alice Cooper I'm 18. But he went from there to, I think one of his earliest, next song might have been, certainly one of his early songs was Beat on the Brat, whose melodic and chord changes on it are so brilliant and unique that he was already a virtuoso songwriter by about his second song.
Well, it's kind of like the Beatles. Like, you had McCartney and Lennon. Like, Joey was more of a romantic, more ballad type of things, although he wrote a lot of punk rock stuff too, but Dee Dee was more punk rock, heavier punk rock, so you had like the Lennon-McCartney aspect of the group there.
Dee Dee was a bit isolationist, I think is probably the best word. He was a bit separate sometimes because he was in his own space. I mean, as I said earlier, the thing about when we did a gig at Brixton Academy, he said to me, "How was it tonight?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Were we fast enough?" I said, "Eh? Of course you were." And he said, "Because I don't know what else I could do. If I had to put on a CV, I'm a punk rocker, that wouldn't qualify for a job selling newspapers on the Brooklyn Bridge." And I was stunned that he'd thought that far from actually leaving the band and doing something else.
He just couldn't stop. I mean, he just was doing stuff all the time. But he's like intense. He was an intense person. Whatever he did, it was intense. Writing, he was intense. Taking drugs, it was intense. He had to do too much of that. He'd write all the time. He'd just, he's all off the road. He started painting. He was a very intense character.
Well, he was a very. It was amazing that Dee Dee could play a musical instrument at all, because he was so. I mean, he was so hyper and just so. Like seemed to have attention deficit disorder, like I say, and the fact that he could master the instrument was amazing, and of course this gave him a totally unique style and a unique way. I'm not actually sure if he knew what actual notes he was playing. I mean, I knew other musicians like that too. They sort of play by instinct rather than by actual knowledge of the scales or anything like that. They basically do it in their own way. It's sort of organic. And he was definitely like that. He had his own way of figuring these things out.
Unfortunately, he had problems. Mental problems. He had multiple personalities, and unfortunately, his personality that kind of brought him down took over too much. If you read his books are like very depressing, and everybody's against poor Didi, and it wasn't like that. It's all in his mind basically, and he just couldn't handle it. What was going on? It's unfortunate. Didi and I lived in Queens, so we'd drop everybody off in Manhattan, and I'd take a lot of rides with him, and so I developed a good relationship with him, and try to get into his head, but forget it. It was one of his many heads, I should say. It was very difficult, very difficult.
Well, you are loud enough, baby. You better shut it up.
Most bands, bass players were never up front. Bass players were not usually the focus of the band, But the Ramones